At a small diner, an older black man dressed simply walked in. The staff glanced at him once, then turned away. No one greeted or served him. He watched sadly as they eagerly waited on the wealthier customers. Then one waitress stepped forward, smiling and treating him like any other guest. But that simple act got her yelled at and fired by the manager. Just when she hit her lowest point, the man stood up for her. No one expected that he was actually the owner of the restaurant chain, and the manager was about to learn a lesson he'd never forget. Before we go back, let us know where you're watching from, and subscribe, because tomorrow I've got something extra special for you. On Saturday nights, Diner Kingsley never stopped moving. The floor stayed slick with a thin layer of oil that clung to every shoe. The air was dense with the scent of grilled onions and fryer grease, and the hum of overlapping conversations echoed from the booths to the kitchen line. Agnes Sigrid had worked enough double shifts to know that moments of quiet didn't exist here. Still, she moved with purpose, weaving between servers, dodging open trays, balancing 2 plates of meatloaf and mashed potatoes while keeping an eye on Table 9's half-empty coffee. Her apron was already wrinkled and her back had begun to stiffen hours ago, but there was no time to slow down. Not when the place was packed and the rhythm of survival depended on not missing a beat. She adjusted the pen tucked behind her ear, set down the plates, and offered a tired but sincere smile to the elderly couple now digging into their dinner. Behind the counter, Paige leaned one elbow against the register, her other hand twirling a strand of hair. She laughed a little too loud at something Spencer said. He wasn't doing much, just sipping soda and pretending to wipe down a perfectly clean countertop. His apron looked too fresh for someone supposed to be sweating through dinner rush. Agnes didn't need to hear the details to know they'd already written this shift off. Paige and Spencer worked like performance artists, appearing helpful when the manager passed, vanishing when it got hard, and Clyde Campbell, their manager, let them. That was the part that really burned. He was stationed just outside the kitchen door, arms folded like a supervisor on patrol, but he wasn't looking at service. He was looking for tips and status. He'd made it clear early on, serve the ones who look like they'll spend more. The rest could wait. Agnes had never been good at waiting. She didn't complain. She just worked. Because she had rent due in 9 days, and because her younger brother Isaac had his final law school payment coming up at the end of the semester. He didn't know she'd picked up extra shifts to cover it. He wouldn't let her if he did. But this was the deal. They looked out for each other. He had books. She had sore feet. That's how it went. It was just after 8 when the man walked in. He wasn't young, maybe mid-60s, and there was nothing remarkable about him at first glance. His shirt was buttoned to the collar, no tie. The fabric was neat clean, but faded. Dark slacks, good shoes polished, but scuffed at the toe. He held no phone, wore no watch. His hands were tucked in his pockets as he stepped inside and paused. His posture was upright, calm, as though he had walked into a familiar place and expected to be greeted, but no one moved. Paige glanced at him, her expression unreadable, and turned back to the man at the counter who wore a gold chain and flashed a $100 bill like it was a passport. Clyde didn't look up. Spencer walked off to the drink station and began clinking ice like he had something urgent to do. Even the newer hires taking cues from everyone else seemed unsure. The man stood there waiting, not impatient, not confused, just waiting. From the back corner near the ice cream cooler, Agnes saw it unfold. She saw the pause in the man's walk, the slight hesitation in his stance. She saw the way no one greeted him, how the air around him grew still. And more than that, she saw herself not literally, but something deeper. She knew what it felt like to be invisible in a room full of people who chose not to see you. She took a deep breath, slid her notepad into her apron pocket, and walked forward. "Good evening, sir," she said, her tone respectful but direct. "Welcome to Diner Kingsley. I can take care of you right over here." The man turned his head slowly. His eyes met hers, not sharply, but with a kind of focus that made her pause for half a second. There was no judgment in his expression, no irritation, just observation. Then gradually a small smile formed. "Well," he said, voice smooth, steady, and warm, "it's nice to finally be noticed." Agnes nodded and motioned toward a booth by the window, one of the few still clean and open. "This one, okay. It's perfect." She handed him a menu, though he didn't open it right away. Instead, he looked around the room once more, then back at her. "Take your time," she said gently. "I'll be right back with water." She returned with the glass a minute later, notebook open in hand. Do you already know what you'd like?" He tapped the side of the menu once, then pushed it slightly toward her. "Double cheeseburger, no onions, fries extra crispy, black coffee." Agnes smiled, jotted it down. "Coming right up." As she walked back to the kitchen, she felt the weight of a dozen glances. Paige leaned toward Spencer and whispered something low. Spencer snorted. Clyde's head had finally lifted, and now his eyes tracked Agnes like she'd broken some rule he never put in writing. She ignored them all. She handed off the ticket to the cook, checked the fryer herself to make sure it was clean, and poured the coffee with care. No shortcuts, no attitude. She brought it out on a tray within 5 minutes, made sure the burger was hot and the fries crisp. When she set the tray down, the man looked up. That was quick. "We try our best," Agnes replied simply. He picked up the coffee, turned the mug in his hand once, then looked her in the eye. "You have a good attitude," he said. "Not everyone takes pride in what they do, but you do. It shows." Agnes felt a brief flush creep into her chest. She wasn't used to compliments from customers, especially the kind that weren't about her looks or her speed. "I just think everyone deserves to be treated with respect," she said, almost automatically. The man smiled again, deeper this time. "That's rare." He lifted a fry, took a bite, then glanced back at her. "Thank you, Agnes." Her hand froze slightly at the side of her apron. She hadn't told him her name. Her name tag was covered by a folded dish towel. He went back to eating like nothing had happened. Agnes turned and walked away, but her heart was thudding louder than before. Behind her, Clyde was watching. His jaw clenched slightly. She returned to the kitchen and stood near the register, not saying anything, just breathing slowly. The man never called for anything else. He ate quietly, sipped his coffee, and when he finished, left cash tucked neatly under the mug. No receipt, no fuss. Before he walked out, he turned one last time. Their eyes met. He nodded once, then he was gone. The morning after that strange, heavy Saturday night, Diner Kingsley felt off, not quiet. The air still buzzed with the usual clatter of early prep pans scraping against burners, the soft sizzle of bacon on the grill, the familiar hiss of the coffee machine warming up for the morning crowd. But beneath all that, something else lingered, a stillness that didn't belong. It wasn't the usual morning lag. It was the kind of silence people make when they know something is about to happen, but they're pretending not to. Agnes Sigrid walked in through the side door as she always did. Her hair pulled back into its usual bun apron, folded neatly under her arm. She gave a quick nod to Dara, the new cashier, who offered her a small smile, and quickly returned to stacking creamer cups. The girl didn't say a word. Neither did anyone else. Spencer stood near the fountain machine, wiping down the counter with circular motions that had no real purpose. Paige was already dressed, her lipstick fresh, but she wasn't laughing this morning. She was standing still, arms crossed, eyes darting toward the office door. Clyde was waiting. Agnes knew the feeling. Something in her gut tensed the way it did when you know the conversation ahead isn't going to be fair or clear or honest. But she walked past them anyway. She tied her apron with slow, practiced hands, glanced at the clock, and then heard it. "Agnes." Clyde's voice came from behind the office door, low and firm. "Can I see you for a second?" She turned and met his gaze. His face was unreadable tight, measured with the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. Agnes walked past Paige and Spencer, who both suddenly found something else to look at, and stepped inside. The office was small and stale, like the inside of a lunchbox left too long in the sun. Papers cluttered the desk. A half-eaten breakfast sandwich sat cold beside the monitor, but at the center of the desk, perfectly alone, was a plain white envelope. Clyde didn't motion for her to sit. He walked around the desk slowly and took his place in the worn-out swivel chair. Then he leaned back, laced his fingers over his stomach, and exhaled like this conversation was a burden to him. Agnes stood silently. Her arms were at her sides, her posture calm, but her fingers curled slightly under the hem of her apron. Clyde studied her for a moment longer. Then he began. "We've been looking at the numbers," he said. "Staffing mostly. Corporate's on us to keep things lean." Agnes raised an eyebrow just slightly. Since when does corporate care about lean on a Sunday morning? He didn't answer that. Instead, he leaned forward, sliding the envelope across the table. "I'll be direct. We're letting you go. Effective today." She stared at the envelope but didn't reach for it. "Why budget cuts? You cut the one person who worked the most tables last night." Her voice didn't rise, but there was steel in it now. Clyde shrugged carefully. "It's nothing personal." And that was the moment something inside her shifted, because she knew the truth. She'd known it before he even said the words. He was scared, not of her, but of something she represented. He looked down at his desk, but his mind was elsewhere. Inside Clyde's thoughts, something churned. She shouldn't have stepped in last night. That old man wasn't supposed to be served, not by her. He didn't fit the profile. Didn't look like he tipped. Didn't look like he mattered. Clyde had built a system, one that kept the place running smooth. You give the attention to the customers who look like they'll spend. You make room for the regulars who flash cash. You don't waste time on the quiet types, the ones with scuffed shoes and no phone in hand. That's how he trained his staff, even if he never put it in writing. And it worked until she went and smiled at the wrong damn customer. Clyde clenched his jaw. That old man had eyes too sharp, a voice too calm. And when he looked around the room before leaving, Clyde felt something crawl up his spine. The man had seen everything, and Agnes had stood right there handing him coffee like he was the mayor. Now Clyde was waiting for the call, the audit, the complaint, the one thing he'd spent years avoiding. So he made his move first, cut the cord before it burned him. Back in the room, Agnes was still standing. "You're not saying the real reason," she said, her voice low. "You're trying to get ahead of something." Clyde gave a short, humorless smile. "I'm doing what's best for the store." Agnes stepped forward one pace only. "No, you're doing what's best for yourself." There was a pause. Clyde's jaw tightened. "You can pick up your check next Friday." That was it. Agnes didn't answer. She didn't take the envelope. She turned open the door and walked out. No one said anything when she passed the counter. Paige lowered her eyes. Spencer had disappeared into the back. Agnes walked straight through the diner, past the booths, out the glass door, and into the early morning sun. Outside, the city was waking up slow. A bus rolled past. A dog barked somewhere in the alley. Agnes stood on the sidewalk for a moment, blinking against the light. Then she walked to her car, opened the door, sat behind the wheel, and didn't start the engine. She didn't cry, didn't shout. She just sat there, staring at the steering wheel, like it might answer a question no one else would. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A message lit the screen. "Isaac, morning sis. About to head into my contracts class. Everything okay?" Agnes typed back quickly. "Fine. Just a long shift. Proud of you. Let me know how class goes." She added a heart emoji and pressed send. Then she let the phone slide into the passenger seat. That night, she stayed home. Isaac had an evening seminar and wouldn't be back until after 9. The apartment was still and warm, smelling faintly of coffee and cinnamon air freshener. Agnes sat at the small kitchen table, the same envelope from the office lying unopened in front of her. She didn't touch it. She didn't want to open anything that didn't offer a way forward. She had no backup plan. She'd spent everything keeping up with rent, groceries, and Isaac's tuition. She'd counted on one more paycheck, maybe two, just enough to make it to spring. She rested her head in her hands and breathed slowly. Her shoulders were tight, her chest heavy. It wasn't just about the job. It was about how easy it had been for Clyde to erase her. No conversation, no defense, just gone. At 8:13, her phone rang. She didn't recognize the number, but something about it made her answer. "Hello, good evening, Miss Sigrid." The voice was familiar, deeper over the phone, but still calm, still even. She sat upright. "This is Jasper Edith. I believe we met yesterday." Agnes's heart skipped, but her voice held steady. "Yes, I remember. I assume you're no longer at Kingsley." "No," she said, "I'm not." There was a pause, not awkward, more like he was letting the truth land. "I'd like to hear why." Agnes told him, slowly, clearly. Not to vent, just the facts, the favoritism, the culture of looking the other way, the sudden termination, the silence from everyone else. She expected him to ask questions, to challenge parts of the story, but he didn't. When she finished, he simply said, "I see." Then came the sentence that changed everything. "I'd like to meet with you. Tomorrow morning, if you're available. I have something to discuss with you." Agnes paused. "What kind of something?" "A proposal," Jasper said. "One that may interest you." And just like that, he ended the call. Agnes sat motionless for a few seconds, phone still in her hand. Then, for the first time since she left the diner, she felt something settle in her chest. Not relief, not yet, but a reason to sit up straighter, to breathe a little deeper. The morning sun cast a soft golden light across the storefronts of downtown as Agnes Sigrid stepped off the bus and into a street that somehow felt quieter than it looked. Cars moved steadily through intersections, distant horns honked without urgency, and the scent of warm pastry mixed with fresh coffee drifted through the crisp air. She followed the directions she'd written by hand, pen, and paper, her preferred way, and walked a few blocks until she reached the cafe. It was small, tucked between a bookstore and a flower shop with white wooden trim and a faded blue awning that gave it a kind of quiet dignity. The bell above the door gave a soft chime as she stepped inside, the sound strangely comforting. Inside, the atmosphere was different from Diner Kingsley in every possible way. There was no grease in the air, no clatter of silverware being tossed into bins, no sharp shouting from a kitchen line. Only calm voices, the soft hum of jazz from overhead speakers, and the warmth of polished wood and morning light falling through tall windows. She spotted him almost immediately. Jasper Edith sat at a corner table near the window, a steaming mug of coffee in front of him, his posture composed but relaxed. He wore a charcoal gray suit, tailored but not flashy, the top button of his shirt left open. There was a quiet power about him, not forced or performative, just steady. Present. He looked up as she approached and gave a small nod of acknowledgement, the kind that didn't need words to say. "I'm glad you came." Agnes hesitated for only a second, then walked to the table. "Mr. Edith," she said softly, unsure of what else to call him. He gave a gentle wave of his hand, gesturing for her to sit. "Please," he said, "just Jasper." She lowered herself into the chair across from him, folding her hands on the table like she had to ground them. She still didn't know what she was doing here. The last 24 hours had left her unmoored. One moment she was standing at a register taking orders and wiping down counters, and the next she was being pushed out like she was a threat to the building. She hadn't expected justice, but she hadn't expected punishment for being decent either. Jasper watched her not with the scrutiny of a boss, but with the quiet consideration of someone who listened before he spoke. He took a sip from his mug and then set it down with care. "Do you know why I asked you to come?" he asked. Agnes shook her head slowly. "I don't," she admitted, "but I figured it wasn't about another cheeseburger." That made him smile, not wide, but with genuine warmth. "No, not this time." He sat back slightly, folding one hand over the other. "Let me start by telling you something I rarely explain in these kinds of meetings. I wasn't always the owner of anything, let alone Kingsley." His tone stayed calm, but there was weight in his words. "I was born on the south side of Montgomery, Alabama. My mother worked 2 jobs. My father worked nights when he could get the hours. The first job I ever had was washing dishes in the back of a barbecue joint that wouldn't let me eat out front." Agnes felt her chest tighten slightly. Jasper's eyes were steady, not angry, but full of memory. "I was 16. I remember the manager, a white man in his 50s, told me to use the back entrance and not speak unless I was spoken to. I did that job for over a year. I never once sat at a table inside." Agnes said nothing. She didn't need to. Her silence was the kind of silence that meant listening with your whole body. Jasper continued, "I've been in this business a long time. I've worked from the lowest rung up, not just because I wanted to succeed, but because I wanted to understand how power really works in places like diners and corner restaurants. People think the biggest decisions happen in boardrooms. They don't. They happen when a server decides whether or not to speak up, when a manager chooses to turn his head, when a customer gets ignored because of how they look." He paused, then leaned forward slightly. "That's why I built Kingsley. Not to make money that came later. I built it because I wanted to create a space where the person with the most basic dignity was the one who got noticed, not the one who spent the most." He let the words settle. Then he continued, "But somewhere along the way, things shifted. Not every manager follows that idea. Some start seeing patterns, favoring what's easy, protecting what makes them comfortable. And when that happens, someone like you stands out." Agnes felt her breath slow. Her throat tightened in a way she hadn't expected. It wasn't praise that got her, it was being seen. "I didn't do anything special," she said quietly. "He was just standing there. Nobody helped him. It didn't feel right to pretend I didn't see him." Jasper nodded. "That's the difference. Most people wait until someone tells them what to do. You didn't." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small card case. From it, he slid a clean embossed business card across the table toward her, his name, his title, and a direct phone number. Then he spoke with no hesitation. "I want you to come back to Kingsley. The same location." Agnes's eyes widened and she opened her mouth, but he raised a hand gently, not as a server, as the general manager. She froze. For a few seconds, the noise of the cafe around her faded. Her mind stumbled, trying to catch up with what she'd just heard. "I've never managed anyone," she said. "I've never even thought about leading a team." Jasper nodded. "That's why I want you. You don't lead with ego. You lead by doing." He leaned back again, his voice never rising, but carrying all the clarity it needed. "I've had eyes on that store for months. The numbers were good. The energy was not. Clyde created a system that served the staff, not the customers. That's not what I built." Agnes shook her head more to herself than him. "If I go back there, they're not going to make it easy." She pictured Paige's smirk, Spencer's smirks, the way Clyde had looked at her like she was a threat to his house of cards. Jasper gave the slightest of nods. "They won't, but I'm not asking you to fix them. I'm asking you to reset the tone. Set a new standard. The right people will follow it. The others will make their choice." Agnes looked down at the card, her fingers tracing the edge. It felt heavy in her hand, not because of its weight, but because of what it represented. She wasn't used to being offered anything. She was used to earning every inch, every hour. But this was someone offering her the chance to build something, not just survive it. Jasper stood. Agnes followed. At the door, he turned to her one last time. "You don't have to decide today. But if you're ready to stop taking orders and start giving them, your table is waiting." He left her there, standing in a cafe filled with soft jazz and the scent of roasted beans, holding a card that somehow carried more meaning than any paycheck she'd ever earned. She didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time the choice was hers. Agnes stood in front of the mirror that morning, longer than she meant to, adjusting the collar of her crisp navy blue manager's uniform for the third time. The tag still itched at the back of her neck, and the name badge, simple silver, her name printed clearly above the word manager, felt heavier than it looked. She had ironed the shirt the night before, not because she wanted to impress anyone, but because she needed to feel grounded. Isaac had left early for class, leaving a note on the counter that said, "You got this." Just 3 words, but she read them 5 times before she finally picked up her keys and walked out the door. As she approached Dana Kingsley, her footsteps slowed. The building looked exactly the same. Same faded red sign, same windows smudged by the fingerprints of dozens of daily regulars, the same front door where she had once stood silently trying not to cry after Clyde fired her without cause. Now, only a few days later, she was walking back in, not to pick up a shift, but to take command of the very place that once discarded her, like she didn't matter. She pushed the door open just after opening hour. The bell above the entrance gave its usual sharp chime, and for a second, everything inside the restaurant paused, not in chaos, but in recognition. Heads turned. Paige, who had been wiping the counter with her back, turned froze mid-motion. Spencer, standing at the soda station with a stack of clean cups, lowered them one by one as his eyes locked onto the uniform Agnes wore. The name tag wasn't flashy, but it may as well have been a spotlight. Dara, the newest hire, glanced up from the register and gave a polite nod. Confused maybe, but polite. Agnes didn't smile right away. She walked to the center of the room, set her bag behind the host's stand, and adjusted her sleeves before speaking. "Good morning, everyone," she said, clearly her tone calm but steady. "Some of you may have already heard. Starting today, I'll be managing this location. Full-time." No one clapped. No one said, "Welcome back." The room didn't erupt. Instead, there was a quiet that wasn't quite hostile, but it wasn't warm either. It was a stillness built on calculation, on hesitation, on people figuring out what this meant for them. Agnes didn't take it personally. She had expected this. She turned toward the kitchen, checked the prep sheet posted on the cooler, and began moving through the space like she belonged, because now she did. She greeted the cook, a quiet man named Lorenzo, who had been there longer than all of them. He nodded back with something close to a smile, which was more than she expected. Paige finally spoke once Agnes passed behind the counter. "That was fast," she muttered just loud enough. "From waitress to queen of the castle." Spencer chuckled low but said nothing. Agnes turned her head slightly, eyes still on the inventory list she was reviewing. "I'm not here to be a queen," she said without looking up. "I'm here to make sure everyone does their job." It wasn't a threat. It was a reminder. The day went on. Orders came in tables filled slowly, and Agnes worked alongside her staff rather than behind a closed door. She refilled coffee, helped restock straws when the bin ran low, and double-checked the delivery invoice when it arrived. She didn't bark commands. She didn't hover. She simply did the work, setting the tone, not by shouting, but by doing. But that didn't mean things were smooth. Paige deliberately left one order unclaimed on the counter, letting fries sit too long under the heat lamp. When Agnes asked why, Paige shrugged and said she didn't hear the ticket go off. Spencer took nearly 5 minutes to pour a single glass of water, spending most of the time chatting with another employee about a basketball game. These weren't accidents. They were tests, small ones, passive ones, but tests nonetheless. Agnes noted each of them not with anger, but with clarity. She had expected resistance. She just hadn't expected it to feel so personal. There were moments she caught herself wondering if they were right, if she was in over her head, if Jasper had made a mistake, if she belonged more on the floor than behind the clipboard. But then she'd remember what Jasper told her in that cafe full of quiet jazz and old wood and soft certainty, you lead by doing. So she did. By midday, she called a brief team meeting near the host stand. She didn't stand above them. She didn't call them out. She just spoke. Starting this week, she said, clearly we'll be rotating sections fairly, including lunch and dinner shifts. Tip pooling will be adjusted to reflect actual hours worked, not just seniority. And every customer, no matter what they look like or what they order, gets the same level of service. No exceptions. No one responded. Paige raised an eyebrow. Spencer folded his arms. Agnes let the silence hold for a moment, then nodded once and returned to her station. She knew they didn't like it, but she wasn't there to be liked. She was there to lead. That afternoon, she found a brief moment alone in the back office, the same space where Clyde once sat, and handed her a white envelope without eye contact. The desk still had the same scratches. The chair still creaked when she sat in it, but it felt different now. He had used the office like a throne. She would use it like a tool. She leaned back, exhaled slowly, and looked out the small square window that gave a partial view of the kitchen. Paige was laughing again. Spencer was leaning on the counter. But Quiet Dara was moving fast, helping clear plates and refill water with the kind of urgency that Agnes recognized. She made a mental note to thank her before the shift ended. As the dinner rush approached, Agnes returned to the floor. The restaurant filled again. Customers lined up, families with tired parents and kids in soccer uniforms, a couple celebrating an anniversary, a man in work boots still dusty from a long day. Agnes greeted each of them with the same tone, the same energy. She noticed that Dara began to mirror her, and slowly, barely perceptibly, the tone of the room began to shift. Just a little. Not everyone noticed, but Agnes did. And she knew. This was how it began. Not with a speech, not with applause, but with quiet changes, with consistency, with dignity. The first few days under Agnes's management passed with the kind of quiet resistance that didn't leave bruises but wore on the nerves. Nothing outright, nothing loud, just looks that lingered too long, smiles that didn't reach the eyes, tasks that took twice as long as they should have. Paige had mastered the art of selective hearing, while Spencer moved like he was permanently tired. Still, Agnes held steady. She arrived early, stayed late, kept her tone even, and her expectations clear. She wasn't trying to win hearts, not yet. She was trying to plant something firmer, consistency, accountability, and just enough dignity to remind the staff and the customers that this place could be more than a stop on the way home. And for a while, it seemed to be working. Even Dara, young and cautious, started to find her rhythm, greeting customers with more confidence, speaking up more clearly on the line. But then things started to slip. At first, it was subtle. A missed item here. A ticket that printed with the wrong modifier. A customer charged for 2 sodas instead of 1. Agnes chalked it up to adjustment. Systems need time to breathe, to stretch into new habits. But then it happened again, and again. And this time the mistakes were more pointed fries coming out cold, despite fresh drop times coupons rejected, even though they were clearly valid online reviews mentioning rude service from employees Agnes hadn't even scheduled that day. At first, she thought it was coincidence, but the pattern formed too cleanly. Always during her shifts, always attached to tables that had either been served by Paige or handed off to Spencer. One afternoon, a couple approached the counter, both visibly frustrated. The woman held a receipt in one hand and pointed at it with her phone. "This is the second time we've been overcharged," she said, trying to stay calm. "We were charged for 3 burgers, and we only ordered 2. Agnes took the receipt, scanned it, and immediately saw the discrepancy. She apologized, refunded the difference, and comped their drinks. But her heart was pounding not from panic but from recognition. This wasn't just sloppiness. This was sabotage. That evening, long after the dinner rush had ended and the chairs were flipped on the tables, Agnes sat in the office staring at the daily sales report. Something was off. The numbers didn't match the orders she remembered approving. Some entries were modified after the fact. Item prices had been manually adjusted, discounts removed, but the system didn't show which user ID had made the changes. Whoever was doing it knew how to cover their tracks. The next day, as she checked the line before the shift began, she noticed something that made her stomach turn. Clyde Campbell was standing outside the window across the street, sipping coffee from a paper cup. He wasn't hiding. He was angled just enough to make sure she saw him. And when she did, he lifted his cup slightly, as if toasting her, and smiled. Not warmly, not cruelly, just smug, like he never really left. Agnes turned away, pressed her hands against the stainless steel of the prep table, and forced herself to breathe. When she stepped back out, Clyde was gone, but the unease remained. Around mid-afternoon, Spencer started acting strange, more jittery than usual, checking his phone, often whispering to Paige in the hallway behind the soda machine. Agnes didn't confront them directly. Not yet. She needed more than instincts. She needed facts. That night after close, she found Dara still wiping down tables, even though her shift had ended 30 minutes earlier. "You're still here?" Agnes asked gently. Dara nodded a little sheepishly. "Just wanted to help finish up," she said, then paused. "Actually, can I ask you something?" Agnes raised an eyebrow. "Sure." Dara lowered her voice. "I saw Paige in the office last night. After closing, she said she was checking the tip log, but I thought only managers could do that." Agnes's jaw tightened. "What time was this?" "Close to 10, Dara replied. "She said she forgot something, but she was logged in for a while. At the terminal." Agnes nodded, thanking Dara, then sent her home with a quiet thank you and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Once alone, she pulled up the internal login records for the past week. The system didn't show names, but she could see access times. And sure enough, someone had logged into her office terminal late at night on 3 different occasions each time after Agnes had already signed out. The same pattern, same 2-hour window, same system changes. The next morning, she arrived an hour earlier than scheduled. She sat in the office lights dimmed computer screen on and waited. At precisely 9:30, Paige walked in through the side door. She didn't notice Agnes sitting quietly in the corner. She moved like she had every right to be there, walked to the terminal, typed quickly, and leaned in close to the screen. Agnes waited until she was 2 steps from the door before flipping on the overhead light. Paige froze. "Looking for something?" Agnes asked, voice calm. Paige straightened, face unreadable, but the color drained slightly from her cheeks. "I was just checking the schedule," she said flatly. "You're not on today," Agnes replied. "And you don't need my terminal to check a shift." Paige crossed her arms. "I've been here longer than you've been wearing that badge. I know how things work around here." Agnes didn't blink. "Yes, and that's exactly why you know better than to tamper with sales reports." Paige rolled her eyes. "Oh, please. Don't act like you're better than everyone just because Jasper likes your sob story." Agnes stepped forward, slow and steady. "This isn't about Jasper. This is about accountability. And if you want to test mine, you're welcome to keep going." She let the words settle. Paige stared at her for a long second, then turned on her heel and stormed out. Agnes stood there, breathing in the stale air of the office, hands clenched tight enough to leave marks on her palms. It wasn't just Paige. It wasn't just the lies. It was the shadow still hanging over the room. Clyde might not have keys anymore, but he had left his fingerprints on every corner of this place. Through the loyalty he bought the bitterness, he nurtured the cracks he created in people's dignity. And now Agnes understood what Jasper meant when he said some damage couldn't be fixed by policy or title alone. Some of it had to be fought day by day, choice by choice. She sat down at the desk, logged into the system, and began making notes, times, dates, behaviors. This wasn't over, but now she knew what she was up against. Agnes stayed late that night, long after the last table had been wiped down and the last receipt closed. The air in the restaurant was still, but not quiet. The hum of the refrigerator motors in the back and the soft clink of cups being stacked in the kitchen filled the silence like background noise in a conversation she hadn't started yet. She sat alone in the office with the screen in front of her eyes, scanning the report for the 3rd time. Every time she thought she had all the numbers aligned, something slipped. One refund too many, a cash adjustment that didn't follow protocol, logins at odd hours, patterns she could no longer ignore. The cursor blinked at the edge of a line that told her exactly what she had begun to suspect. The adjustments had come from Spencer's login, dozens of them, each one tied to a receipt that ended in a customer complaint or a quiet overcharge. She leaned back in the chair, the old leather creaking beneath her weight. Her heartbeat was steady, but there was something tight in her chest. Not panic, not anger. A kind of grief, maybe the kind that came when you realized someone you had once given the benefit of the doubt to had quietly chosen to stand against you. The next morning, she called him in before the lunch rush. Spencer walked in wearing his usual half-zipped hoodie over his apron phone still in hand, fingers twitching like he'd just come off a long scroll. He didn't sit until she gestured to the chair. Even then, he slumped into it like he already knew what was coming. Agnes watched him for a few seconds before speaking. "I need to ask you something," she said, her voice even, "and I need you to be honest." Spencer shifted. His eyes flicked to the side, then back to her. "Okay." She turned the monitor toward him. "I pulled login records from the past 2 weeks. These sales adjustments." She tapped the screen lightly. "They all came from your user ID." Spencer went still. Not startled, just still, like someone whose options had suddenly narrowed. Agnes leaned forward. "I want to hear your side before I make any decisions." He swallowed, fingers tapping lightly against his knee. I didn't come up with it," he said, avoiding her eyes. "Paige told me what to do. She said it was just temporary. That it wouldn't matter." Agnes's tone didn't change. "And why would she want to change sales data?" He hesitated. Then his voice dropped. "Because Clyde asked her to." That name sat in the room like a crack in the floor. Agnes's heart didn't skip. She was too prepared for that, but her hands curled slowly, fingers threading together so she wouldn't slam them against the desk. "How long has this been happening?" Spencer shrugged, eyes still low. "Couple weeks, maybe longer. Clyde's been paying her and a couple others. Cash. Said the new system wouldn't last, that he'd be back as soon as the numbers tanked and Jasper lost confidence." Agnes stared at him, not in shock. "Just with the kind of steady focus you use when you're deciding whether someone still deserves to be in the room with you." "And what about you?" she asked. "What did you get?" Spencer looked up, eyes red at the edges. "Nothing. Just, I didn't want to pick a side. Paige said it wouldn't hurt anything, that it was just to make things go back to normal." Agnes stood slowly, not to intimidate him, just to give herself space to breathe. She walked to the file cabinet, opened the top drawer, and pulled out a blank incident form. She placed it on the desk, but didn't fill it out. "You need to understand something," she said, turning back to him. "This isn't about being on my side. It's about whether or not you're willing to be honest, do the job, and not let other people think for you." Spencer didn't speak, but something in his posture shifted. The slump straightened just slightly. The twitch in his fingers stopped. Agnes sat back down. "I'm not firing you today," she said. "But this is the only grace you get. If you want to stay here, you're going to work by the book. No shortcuts, no whispering behind corners, and no loyalty to people who tried to destroy this place." Spencer nodded once. It wasn't defiant. It was quiet, like someone realizing how close they'd come to burning the only bridge they had left. Agnes stood again. "Go clean the drink station. We'll talk more later." When he left the room, she let her shoulders fall for the first time in days. The weight didn't disappear, but it settled. Clearer, sharper. She picked up the incident form, wrote Spencer's name at the top, and made a note. Then she opened her schedule and marked a staff meeting for the next morning. No more whispers. No more hiding. Agnes arrived at the diner before sunrise. The morning was heavy with fog, and the streets were mostly empty, the only movement coming from delivery trucks and the soft flicker of early city lights. She unlocked the front door, flipped the switch for the dining room, and stood for a long moment in the doorway, listening to the quiet. In just under an hour, the staff would arrive. She had called for an all-hands meeting, no exceptions, and the tension in the message was intentional. This wasn't going to be a meeting about napkin shortages or weekend scheduling conflicts. This was the moment they all stopped pretending. Agnes moved through the restaurant, slowly straightening chairs that were already straight, wiping down clean surfaces. It wasn't about the tables. It was about breathing, steadying. When the first employees began to arrive, Dara, then Jeremy from the evening shift, then a few others, there were no jokes, no small talk. Everyone could feel the shift. By 8 o'clock sharp, they were all there. Paige leaned against the soda machine with her arms crossed, trying to look bored. Spencer sat off to the side, quiet eyes down. The newer hires lingered near the back, unsure whether to look at Agnes or at each other. She stood in the center of the dining room, not on a platform, not behind the counter. Just in the middle where everyone could see her, hear her, and know she wasn't going to hide behind a title. "I appreciate you all coming in," she began, her voice steady, but not cold. "There are things that have happened in the past few weeks that need to be addressed. Directly." She paused, let the silence stretch just long enough. "We've had a pattern of customer complaints about incorrect charges, messed up orders, and poor service. At first, I thought it was the usual bumps in a transition. But I started noticing patterns, and more importantly, I started looking into them." She held up a folder thick with printed reports. "These are sales records, login logs, and timestamps. They show a clear timeline of when changes were made, to receipts, who was logged in, and what those changes cost the business." The room went still. Paige shifted her weight, but said nothing. Agnes didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Some of these changes were tied to customer overcharges. Some were made after closing hours when only 1 or 2 people were still in the building. The system doesn't lie. Her eyes moved across the room and settled just briefly on Paige. "I spoke to Spencer. He admitted to making some of those changes, but he also told me something else, that he was instructed to do it by Paige." There it was, out loud. The words floated in the air like smoke from a fire nobody could deny anymore. Paige laughed, not loud, just a short, sharp exhale. "Seriously," she said, arms still crossed. "You believe him over me? Spencer's been lazy since day one. And now he throws me under the bus, and you just eat it up." Agnes kept her voice calm. "I didn't make this decision based on one conversation. I verified the logins. I traced the exact times. They match what he described down to the minute. And I also know that Clyde Campbell has been in contact with multiple employees, promising that if this location failed under my management, he'd be reinstated." Gasps, quiet but audible. Someone muttered, "What?" under their breath. Agnes pressed on. "Let me be clear. I was given this position not because I asked for it, but because I earned it. And I will not let this team be divided by loyalty to someone who no longer works here, someone who used his influence to sow doubt, sabotage, and division." Paige stepped forward now, her expression sharp. "You think any of these people actually believe you belong in that office? You were a server, just like us. Then suddenly, you're in charge. You didn't earn this. You got lucky." Agnes let the accusation land, let it sting, because parts of it weren't new. She'd heard the whispers since her first day back, but that didn't make them true. She took a step forward too. "You're right. I was a server. I know what it feels like to clean up spills, to split tips, to get stiffed on a big table. But being a leader doesn't mean forgetting where you came from. It means holding the door open behind you. And if you think that makes me weak, then you haven't been paying attention." For the first time, Paige looked unsure. Her chin lifted, but her eyes darted to the others in the room. And what she found wasn't agreement. It was hesitation. Dara stepped slightly forward from the group, her voice quiet but firm. "She's the only one who's ever treated me like I mattered here." Agnes didn't smile, but she nodded. "As of today, Paige, you're being suspended pending internal review. You are not to access the register or the system until further notice. We'll be forwarding all findings to regional." Paige stared at her, something wild flashing in her eyes. But she said nothing, just grabbed her bag from behind the counter and walked out the door, swinging closed behind her with a long, slow creak. The silence she left behind was thick. Agnes turned back to the team. "If you've been part of any of this and you want to come forward, now is the time. I will listen, but if I find out later, there will be consequences." No one moved. No one confessed. But something shifted. Spencer met her eyes and gave the smallest nod. Dara stood taller. The others looked at her not with fear, but with something closer to respect. At the far end of the room, near the entrance, the door creaked open again. Jasper Edith stood there in a slate gray coat, hands in his pockets, expression calm but unreadable. He had not announced his arrival, had not made a sound, but now every head turned toward him. He didn't walk in, just looked at Agnes across the room. And when their eyes met, he said one sentence: "This was your room to lead, and you led it." Then he nodded, once turned and left. And Agnes, for the first time in weeks, let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't standing alone anymore. The diner had begun to breathe again. In the week following the staff meeting, something shifted inside Kingsley's walls. The tension that once clung to every shift like static had started to fade. Orders flowed with more ease, service picked up, and even the silence between staff began to fill with conversation again, not loud or celebratory, but cautious and honest. Agnes saw it in the little things, Dara moving with more confidence at the register, Spencer keeping his head down, but his performance steady, and even Jeremy taking initiative on his shifts without being asked. The rebuilding had begun, but Agnes also knew it was too soon to be comfortable. The past didn't release its grip just because the present decided to move forward, and the past in her case still had a name: Clyde Campbell. It happened on a Thursday just before the dinner rush. Agnes was walking the floor, checking that tables were wiped down and that prep was moving smoothly in the kitchen when she felt a disturbance, not a sound, not even a shift in energy. It was more primal than that. When she looked up, Clyde was standing near the entrance, one hand casually resting on the host stand, the other in the pocket of his blazer. He wasn't dressed like a former employee. He looked sharp, intentional, like a man who had chosen his outfit to make a statement. Behind him, a couple customers looked on, confused by the way the staff froze. Clyde smiled. Not broadly, just enough. Agnes felt her chest tighten, not from fear, but from the sheer audacity of his presence. She glanced at Dara, who stood frozen behind the counter, then at Spencer, who had just stepped out of the kitchen with a tray in his hands. He looked at Clyde and stopped mid-step. Agnes moved toward the front, her walk calm, but every cell in her body alert. "Good evening," she said when she reached him. "Can I help you?" Clyde looked her up and down. "Still pretending this place is yours to run, I see." His tone was smooth, laced with that same smug detachment he'd always worn like armor. Agnes didn't flinch. "It's not pretend, it's my job. And you're not welcome behind the host stand." He chuckled softly, glancing around. "You know I trained half of these kids. They didn't used to flinch when I walked in." Agnes didn't respond to that. She turned slightly, motioning toward the dining room. "If you're here to eat, you can seat yourself like any customer. But if you're here to disrupt operations, I'll have to ask you to leave." Clyde took a step closer, just one enough that she could see the twitch of annoyance behind his eyes. "You don't get to tell me where I can or can't stand, Agnes. You might wear the badge, but we both know who built this place." Her voice stayed level, but inside she felt her pulse in her throat. "You ran this location. You didn't build it. You built a culture of fear, favoritism, and silence, and that's over." Customers were starting to notice now. A woman near booth 4 leaned toward her partner, whispering. Two regulars at the counter exchanged glances. Agnes took another small step forward, lowering her voice without softening it. "Clyde, this isn't about pride. You came back to intimidate people. But that doesn't work anymore. You can either sit down like a guest or step outside." He smirked. "You think you've won, don't you?" Agnes didn't blink. "I think you lost the second you chose to sabotage your own people." That landed. For a brief second, Clyde's expression cracked. Not dramatically, but enough. Enough for her to see the flash of anger behind the control. He turned slightly, scanning the room, searching for something, a flicker of support maybe, but there was none. Spencer had put down his tray and stepped behind Dara, who was now standing straight eyes, focused on the exchange. Even Jeremy had emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron, watching. Clyde straightened his jacket and exhaled. "You know what, keep it. This place will rot anyway. Too much softness." Agnes didn't move. "Then you won't mind leaving." He stared at her for one long second, then turned and walked toward the door. No drama, no last word. Just the slow, deliberate walk of someone who had finally realized the room no longer belonged to him. When the door closed behind him, Agnes let out the breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was clean, like the sound that follows a storm finally passing. She turned to the team who were still watching and nodded once. "Back to work," she said simply. That night, after the last customer had gone and the final chairs were flipped, Agnes sat alone in the office, staring at the empty schedule board. There were still gaps to fill, still systems to improve. But tonight she had done something bigger than finish a shift. She had drawn a line, not with noise, not with fear, but with clarity, with presence. The invitation came in the same quiet, deliberate way everything had come from Jasper Edith. No fanfare, no long explanation, just a message sent late in the evening, short and direct. "Coffee tomorrow, same place, 10 sharp. Come alone." Agnes read it twice before placing the phone face down on her nightstand. The apartment was silent, except for the ticking of the old wall clock. and the soft shuffle of Isaac moving around in the kitchen. She didn't respond to the message. She didn't have to. Jasper never asked anything unless he already knew the answer. The next morning, she arrived early. The same cafe with its warm wood-paneled walls and quiet corners welcomed her like it always did. She ordered a black coffee, nodded to the barista, who remembered her name now, and settled into the corner booth by the window. Jasper arrived right on time, coat neatly buttoned, expression unreadable, but never cold. He took his seat without ceremony, set his phone down, screen side down, and met her eyes directly. "I won't draw this out," he began. "You already know why we're here." Agnes folded her hands in front of her, steadying herself. "You're expanding the offer." Jasper nodded. "The regional team has reviewed your numbers. Not just profits, morale, retention, complaint resolution. Kingsley went from a liability to a model location in under 3 months. That doesn't happen unless someone's doing the work most people avoid." She stayed silent, letting him finish. "I want you to take on more. We have 4 locations in the metro area struggling. 2 have management turnover every 6 months. 1's about to be shut down. They don't need someone to audit their books. They need someone who understands what it means to rebuild from the floor." He paused, letting the offer settle. "I want you as regional operations manager. You'd have hiring authority, autonomy, a direct line to me." Agnes felt her pulse rise, not from excitement, but from the sudden weight of it all. She looked down at her coffee at the slight ripple on the surface. It wasn't that she didn't feel honored. She did. But she also felt overwhelmed, and not because she didn't believe she could do the job. She knew she could. What unsettled her was the idea of stepping away from the space she had just managed to stabilize. The team was just beginning to work together. People were learning to trust. What would happen if she left too soon? "They still need me," she said softly. Jasper didn't interrupt. He watched her carefully. "I know I've made progress, but it doesn't feel finished. I just got them standing again." He nodded slowly. "And that's exactly why I'm asking you. Because you know the difference between control and leadership. And you know when to leave a room better than when you walked in." She looked up at him. "What if it all falls apart again?" Jasper leaned forward slightly. "Then they'll rebuild it, because you already taught them how." The conversation ended the way it began, with clarity. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were the details, locations, timelines, transition plans. He didn't push it toward her. He just left it there. "You don't have to answer today. Read it, think it through. But if you're serious about changing the system, this is how you scale it." Agnes carried the folder home unopened. She placed it on the kitchen table next to the unpaid gas bill and Isaac's open textbook. She sat down across from it and stared for a long time. Isaac came out of his room a few minutes later, earbuds and hoodie slouched off one shoulder. When he saw her expression, he pulled out one bud and set it aside. "You okay?" She nodded slowly. "Jasper offered me a regional position, multiple stores." Isaac raised his eyebrows. "That's big. Wow." She gave a quiet laugh that didn't quite carry joy. "Yeah, it is." He sat beside her. "So what's stopping you?" Agnes hesitated. Then she answered honestly. "I don't want to walk away from something I just finished fixing, and part of me wonders if they're only okay because I'm there." Isaac leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "They're okay because you showed them how to be. That doesn't go away just because you change offices. You didn't do all this to stay in one building forever, Agnes. You did it to prove that someone like you could do it better. Now prove it somewhere else." She didn't answer right away, but she listened. The next morning, Agnes arrived early to Kingsley. She didn't head straight for the back office. Instead, she walked the floor, quietly observing. Dara was walking a customer through a complicated allergy order with patience and calm. Spencer had the kitchen running clean, no yelling, no shortcuts. Even Jeremy was helping train one of the new hires on the POS system. Agnes watched them from a distance, hands folded, heart steady. It was working. Not because she was watching, but because the foundation had been laid. She stood there a few minutes longer. Then she turned toward the back, pulled out the folder Jasper had given her, and walked into her office to write her response. Agnes arrived early, as she always did, but this time she wasn't walking into Kingsley as the manager. She stepped through the glass doors, knowing this would be her last shift in the role she had fought so hard to earn. The restaurant was already warm with the scent of brewing coffee and fresh biscuits rising in the kitchen. She moved with quiet purpose, greeting Dara with a soft smile, nodding to Jeremy as he prepped the grill. There was no big announcement, no farewell balloons or awkward hugs. That wasn't her style, and it wasn't the kind of place that needed noise to know something important was happening. She spent the first hour of the morning checking the schedule one last time, revising the tip rotation to cover a new trainee updating the break list. Small things, necessary things. Then, when she stepped into the office, she found Dara already waiting by the door, arms folded, eyes both determined and a little uncertain. "You sure you want me to take it over?" Dara asked, her voice lower than usual. "I mean, you're the reason this place works." Agnes shook her head, steady and kind. "No, you are. All of you. I just helped remind this place of what it could be. Now it's your turn to carry that forward, not alone, with the team." Dara hesitated, then stepped aside to let Agnes pass. Agnes reached into the drawer, pulled out the master keys, and placed them into Dara's hand. For a second, she just held them there, letting the weight pass from one hand to another, both literally and symbolically. Dara's hand closed around them with a shaky breath, and Agnes gave her shoulder a brief squeeze. By the time Agnes walked out, the sun had fully crested the skyline. She took a final look at the storefront, the red trim, the flickering open sign, the windows that caught the morning light just so, and then she turned and walked to her car. The file from Jasper sat on the passenger seat open, now corners creased from being read too many times. The first location she would visit was 15 minutes across town, tucked in a quiet shopping plaza where the foot traffic had slowed and the energy inside had dimmed even more. She drove there in silence, no music, no distractions, only the steady hum of the road beneath her tires and the thoughts pressing against her ribs. When she arrived, the contrast was immediate. The parking lot was mostly empty. Inside, the tables were half clean, the napkin holders half filled, and the staff behind the counter looked more like they were killing time than serving guests. The current manager, a man in his late 30s named Tom, greeted her with a practiced smile that didn't touch his eyes. His handshake was dry, polite, detached. He gave her a quick tour of the kitchen, listed the staff names without much context, then excused himself to the back office and didn't come out again. Agnes didn't chase him. She walked the floor instead, stopping briefly to chat with the host, who didn't make eye contact, and with the dishwasher, a young man who spoke more with his eyes than his mouth. She asked questions not to pry, but to listen. She watched how the servers moved flat-footed, slow, no rhythm. She noticed how no one looked up when a customer entered, how no one smiled, unless directly told to. The shift-led answered questions with yes or no, nothing more. There was no hostility, just numbness. Like everyone was waiting for something to change, but no one believed it actually would. Agnes stayed until close, standing near the dish pit at the end of the night, watching as plates clattered and trays were stacked unevenly. Then she slipped into the office and left a single note on the desk. Team meeting, tomorrow, 9 a.m., all staff required. The next morning, the staff gathered slowly. Some stood with arms crossed, others slouched in their chairs or leaned against walls, clearly unsure of what to expect. Tom was absent, claiming a schedule conflict. Agnes didn't comment. She stood near the front of the dining room, hands clasped loosely in front of her eyes, steady but calm. "I won't take much of your time," she began, "but I want to tell you why I'm here. Not because someone complained, not because I was sent to check boxes or look over your shoulders. I'm here because something in this store is broken. Not the equipment, not the menu, the spirit." Some of the employees exchanged glances, unsure whether to be offended or relieved that someone had finally said it out loud. Agnes continued, "I know what it feels like to come to work tired, to feel invisible, to stop caring, because it seems like no one else does. I started as a server. I cleaned bathrooms, worked doubles, went home with my back aching, and my tips barely covering rent. I've been dismissed, overlooked, and told to be quiet. But I also know what happens when someone refuses to accept that as normal, and I'm here because I think you deserve better." She let that land. She didn't smile, didn't plead, she simply said it, then paused. "I'm not going to fix this place for you. That's not how this works, but I'm going to work alongside you. I'm going to show up, I'm going to listen, and I'm going to expect more, not because I want you to suffer, but because I know you can do better than this." The room was quiet, but no longer dismissive. One of the cooks gave a slow nod. A server near the back uncrossed her arms. It wasn't applause. It didn't need to be. That evening, after the shift, Agnes stayed behind. She organized the supply closet, labeled the dry goods, scrubbed down a grease trap that hadn't been touched in weeks. She rewrote the schedule to balance out the hours more fairly. She took inventory herself, not because anyone told her to, because that's how you build trust, by doing the work no one else wants to do, quietly, consistently. Near midnight, her phone buzzed. A new message from Jasper. Day 1 handled with grace. I chose right. Agnes smiled faintly, tucked the phone into her pocket, and continued folding rags. It was only the beginning. But she had already begun laying the bricks, one shift at a time.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.